Well, welcome into another podcast for the Point After on the Oklahoma Sports Network, live as we're recording this live at the Cameron Podcast Studios. And we're so grateful that we have that relationship that we get a free podcast room with our great partnership with Cameron University. So I'd like to thank them first and foremost for allowing us to have a little bit of time in this podcast room. It's up to like 4 mics, and they're going to expand this. So they're doing a lot to expand in that technology with podcasting here at Cameron University. We are going to talk basketball here in a second. And before we do, I want to, is you got to promote anything that this network does. Very excited to have our 3rd annual OSN football banquet coming up on Monday. We have been all over social media kind of introducing the nominees. We have our player of the year, coach of the year, newcomer or rising star of the year. And then we have added a new category, defensive player of the year. And so we got those to announce. It's a special night. It's a dress-up night. It's a dinner. And for those who are invited guests as our nominees, and then a live broadcast at 7:30 that evening that we will be showing you, so you can actually see they're going to be interviewed, each and every one of them in those categories, and then we'll announce the winner at the conclusion. So we'd like for you to join in. You can just easily download us on the app on Apple and Android devices by searching the Oklahoma Sports Network. I have to keep saying that because a lot of people say, oh, where is your website? Or I go to I said, do you have a phone? Do you have an app? Then download the app. And the reason I say that is because, especially when we're going to talk about these basketball games coming up, there are so many games going on, and maybe games going on at the same time, that you don't have to back out and go to the separate channel. When you have the app, all of the live broadcasts are at the top of the app. And so that means you can jump into one, jump out, and then go back into another game. And so that's easy access. Also on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV, that is for your home devices. For YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's an always growing opportunity because these live productions get pushed out, and there has been more and more interest since the last football season that carries over into basketball season. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then all of our social media from Facebook, Instagram, and X, especially on Facebook, because we'll have some of those live as well. So with all of that, all of the housekeeping in order, we're going to bring in our special guest today, Jordan Ray, who represents Mid-Del, and he is our Mid-Del sports reporter because he wears multifaceted hats. Even though he's got the OSN hat on right now, for those who are watching on YouTube, he's representing Del City, Carl Albert, and Midwest City. And what a great representation it is, because this basketball season has been phenomenal. So now that the brackets have been released since yesterday, thought we'd just kind of come on and talk about what we've been talking about all along, Jordan, about where are these teams going to fare. And it seems like all of your predictions are coming to be true at this point.
Thanks, Eric. Well, my predictions are just simply who's most likely to win state out of the Mid-Del teams. But it does kind of follow the seeding that we have. So what's interesting about 5A this year is they are sticking with a couple things from last year that they changed to. So one of them is that the games are now going to be played in the first weekend, or we call it weekend, then we'll call it the first week, regional week. Games are going to be played Tuesday, girls first round, Thursday, boys first round, and then the regional championships are on Friday. And what's also is going to be the same as last year, and a change that they made last year is that the host teams will now play first, and the other games on that Tuesday and Thursday will be played second. But one thing they're going to go back to that was true until last year is now they're not going to have an extra day of games, which means these first round games are single elimination games. So there's not going to be a consolation path to get to the area weekend. You have to win your first round game. So a lot going on that first week, starting next week, of course.
Well, and you got the separation of Tuesdays and Thursdays. We'll kind of go over the matchups and we'll kind of go over what you think should happen. And we're going to play because that's what podcasting is all about. We're just talking heads. So we're just going to be able to talk about who we think shall prevail in these matchups. And then what does it look like when they have to play the next? And, you strap yourselves in because, from regionals, it just seems like you look up and it's an area and then you're punching your ticket to state to get to the final 8. And it will be here before you know it, because we're at the end of February right here. Middle of March is when you're playing the state championship for Class 5A. So you got to get there in a hurry. So strap yourselves in, because this should be a fun outing. And I think, and I'm going to use Lawton as an example. And I talked to them the other day because they had 2, and I found that very interesting. They had 2 1,000 career points. Both were seniors. And I asked his coach, their coach with Chevis Smith, how often have you seen that? I mean, usually you'll have 1,000 career points. He said, I've seen it a couple of times, but it is rare. And because it really kind of shows, like, Elgin girls, for example, had the milestone of 1,000, but she's got it because that is their game plan, is you feed her the ball underneath and she's going to get most of the points. So when you have 2 of them, that means you're sharing the ball, and you're really going to the one person all the time. So you have one with 1,200 career points and the other one with 1,000, both seniors. But what I was talking to Coach about at this time of the year, and he knows it, coming from Millwood and coming from experience of playing a state title, is I don't care how we're playing in December. I really don't care how we're playing in January. It's right now. So who can get hot right now? So all of that stuff that we talked about before, where Midwest City was down, where they lost to both Dell City and Lawton High, and then they turned around and avenged that, and they got their wins. But then they lose to John Marshall. And so, it's okay. Who can get hot right now? And who is it? Who is that team that really is going to put it together?
I think the best way to summarize all this, Eric, is I'm just going to go again with my rankings. This will be the final time, and then we'll just analyze it after this, about the Mid-Del teams most likely to win state. So what you're talking about with balanced scoring, that applies to no team more than the Del City girls team. And even though since we last talked, they lost their first district game of the year, their first home game of the year to Duncan. Well, that says more about Duncan, I think. There was no stakes to that game as far as seeding. Duncan had a chance that night to get to the 2 spot and host, but it didn't happen because Class and SAS also won at that same time. But it still shows that they are capable of making a run. But back to Del City, they finished things off against Class and SAS the Tuesday before. So this is, as of the taping of this podcast, 9 days ago. And they clinched their district title. They have not won a regional championship in quite a while. They didn't win it last year. They still got to state. I love their chance to do it this year. They are going to play in their first round matchup. They're going to play Santa Fe South, and then they will wait and see who wins between Altus and Lawton MacArthur, also on the Del City floor. So that will be a very interesting matchup, because that's a rematch of a consolation game last year that would not be played this year, but was played last year, that Altus kind of shocked the world a bit in winning that game. That eliminated Lawton MacArthur. Well, now, again, we're going back to where the first round is an elimination game. So this will be an elimination game again. And it was pretty surprising that Lawton MacArthur girls did not make it to the area weekend. Now's their chance, but they got to beat Altus. And I think that's a very interesting 4 or 5 matchup. But the Del City girls, back to them, they had their time to rest Kamaya Morgan. When they get her back, they'll be, again, 10 deep and very balanced in how they can score and who they can score with. So I love their chances to win and go 3-0, meaning of a more favorable matchup in the first round of state. And that's important because on the east side, you have 2 strong teams in both girls and boys. So you want to go 3-0 instead of 3-1 to get to state. And the reason is that gives you a more favorable matchup in the first round of state. And the girls' side, that means you more than likely, now things could change with upsets, but more than likely you would avoid Booker T or Coweta in the first round. And why that's important is those 2 teams both went undefeated in district. And if you play a lesser team, you can survive having an off shooting night. You never know when those can happen. And you could afford to have a bit of a more of a bad game. Not you want to have a horrible game by any means, or you'd lose, but you can have an off game and be okay that first day. Now, after that, you're going to play elite teams without a doubt in the semifinals and finals if you get that far. But again, I love Del City girls' chances. Also love will host Guyman in the first round. That should be a 6 o'clock game, and I like their chances to win that game. And then they would play the winner of Lawton MacArthur and Classen SAS, two teams they have seen on their home court already, both of them. And so, but that will be an interesting game on the boys' side. Lawton MacArthur did not make it to the area weekend the last 2 years. So they've been upset or beaten in the first round the last 2 years. This is their chance to avoid that. It'll be an interesting matchup for them, by the way. Classen SAS boys finished 6th, but pretty solid team, actually. They play teams very competitively. So, but back to Del City boys. Again, their team defense is the best of any boys team I've seen on this side of the state. They can really turn it up a notch and then some. And even though they got some shooting questions, they overcome that with some good shooters, but also unbelievably good team defense. And if they are able to win the regional championship again, they would probably play either El Reno or Midwest City. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but I like their chances to go actually all the way and win the area championship and go 3-0 along with Lawton High. Now, next team, Carl Albert girls. I put them ahead of Midwest City boys. We'll talk more about why, but from the Midwest City standpoint, but Carl Albert girls are the third team, most likely team, I think, of the Middale schools to win state. And they will play John Marshall in the first round. It's a very winnable game. They should win that game comfortably, but we'll see, of course. They're not going to take anything for granted. And then I think they'll play the Midwest City girls in the second round. Midwest City girls play Noble. I think Midwest City girls would win that game, but that's a bit more uncertain, of course, because that's a 4-5 matchup. Back to the Carl Albert girls. So we had their game on this past Monday against El Reno. El Reno is the defending state champs. They've only lost a couple of games this year. One was to a 6A team. They've been rolling everybody in district, winning by impressive margins. And Carl Albert beats them by 16. This team has unbelievable chemistry. They're playing tremendous team ball, not as deep or as big as Del City. So player per player, I still prefer Del City. However, the Carl Albert girls, they have an identity. They have a lot of intelligent players. They have capable shooters. And winning that district, which they were able to by avoiding a 4-point loss or more to El Reno, that's huge for them. They don't have to worry about Duncan in the second round like El Reno does. Duncan's the hottest girls team in 5A, I think, besides Carl Albert, who went undefeated in district, so you have to say they're the hottest team. But Duncan girls are pretty good this year, and that's an interesting matchup with them, El Reno. That could be a second-round matchup, them and El Reno at El Reno. Carl Albert avoids that. Now, Midwest City won't be a pushover, but they're not playing great ball right now against good teams. They've really struggled against Classen SAS, so not a walk in the park for Carl Albert, but, you know, they're in a better matchup with Midwest City and maybe Classen SAS than they would be if they had to play Duncan and then Del City. So the reason why they jumped over Midwest City is you mentioned it. Midwest City boys, we're talking about, lost to John Marshall. So I'm still going to put them as the fourth most likely team to win state, but the Carl Albert boys aren't far behind. And for Midwest City, the problem is, you know, if they had beaten John Marshall one of their 2 times they played them, they could match up with Carl Albert, and that's a pretty good matchup for them. But now El Reno's got a really good big player in Trey. Forgot his last name. I think it's Trey Smith, maybe. But he's really good. And Midwest City obviously is not a big team, so that's a potential second-round matchup for them. It's at El Reno. They beat El Reno last year in the regional championship at Midwest City. Now it's going to be at El Reno if they play. But even if they lose that game, I do think they could get into state, taking the tougher path by being a regional runner-up and have to win 2 games the next week. But they got to get healthy. They got to get Chance Bubba Davis back, and then they could cause some damage. They're a dangerous 4 seed, but they're still a 4 seed, and I don't know quite what to make of them because they had unbelievable wins against Dell City and Lawton at home, and then they play John Marshall and just fall flat on their face. So speaking of John Marshall, that's a likely regional matchup for the Carl Albert boys, and that's who I would have next. Carl Albert boys had a really good win against Del Reno. Now, there wasn't any stakes as far as seeding, but both teams really cared about that game, so it was an impressive win for Carl Albert. I still don't know if they're going to have the consistent scoring they need, but the fact that Xavier Garcia is coming off the bench and shooting so well is a good sign for them. But this would be their toughest regional matchup if it gets to that, which I believe it will. Carl Albert boys are playing. By the way, Middle City boys are playing Noble in the first round, and I feel like they should win that game, but we'll see. And the Carl Albert boys are playing Duncan, and I do like Carl Albert to win that game. John Marshall will be playing on that court against Southeast. I like John Marshall to win that game on Thursday. So Friday, the regional championship will be Carl Albert and John Marshall. That would be a very interesting game. That's close to a toss-up. The Carl Albert boys have not really been pushed in regional championship games the last few years. So that could change, and that would be an interesting matchup. But, again, they played well in the loss to Crossings. Crossings is a really good team. They have depth. They have athleticism. Don't have a lot of size. They don't have a big scorer, but they got individuals who can make up for that. So they're an interesting team. We'll see if they can find a consistent way to score when they play the tougher teams in 5A. If they're able to win the regional, they would be matched up in the area championship game against Lawton High. I would definitely like Lawton High in that matchup, but it would be an interesting one for sure. Finally, Midwest City girls, already talked about them. They, again, are having an offensive identity problem. They've struggled against the good teams the last couple of weeks, losing badly to Del City, to Duncan, to Class and SAS twice. So I think they have what it takes to even win at Carl Albert, but they're going to have to upset a couple teams. If they don't beat Carl Albert and get a rematch with maybe Class and SAS, then they have to probably beat then in order to get to state the loser between Del City girls and El Reno girls. And that's a tall order for them right now, unless they can get some consistent shooting. But again, it's the playoffs. And like Coach Ritchie says, the Carl Albert girls coach, everybody starts out 0-0. So even though I have concerns about the teams at the bottom, more so obviously that's why they're the bottom of the list that I give you. Again, they're 0-0, and who knows if they'll start to get hot and correct some of those errors. So, Eric, I know that was a lot. I hope you're able to keep up with it.
Now, you mentioned Del City in the front, with the Del City girls. And that was kind of in the very beginning, you were very impressed to see. But my question is, with all of the basketball you've seen, and you've seen quite a bit representing on this side. Of course, we can't represent the east side of Oklahoma because we don't really get to see them much. So when you mention the west side, of all the teams that we've mentioned, between those in the network that we got to see, what surprised you the most about this season, about any particular team?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the team that surprised me the most is the Carl Albert girls, because they lost some good size and some senior players. They lost a couple of good wing players who were sophomores, and they moved out of the district. So I wasn't sure exactly what they were going to have as far as the players that they would bring up into the rotation who don't have a lot of experience. And both Del City girls and Carl Albert girls have these freshmen that just really impress and intrigue me. Del City has Paris Baker. Carl Albert has Jordan Richardson, and she's been playing unbelievably well, and she doesn't start usually. So she comes off the bench, and she just finds ways to score. So that element. They really didn't even have that last year. They had a lot of good players, but I don't know if they had a true scorer like this. Then you bring in that Coach Hatchett's daughter. He's the Del City boys coach, but his daughter plays for Crawford girls. Malia's played real well, doing a lot of the dirty work for him. And then Hayden Harrell, who, if you know Crawford basketball, you know her brothers. Her brothers were really good players and won state championships at Carl Albert. And now it's her turn. And she's just a tremendous guard. She's not very tall, but she's a really good decision maker, plays with a lot of poise. And then you got Evie Mitchell, who's really started to shoot well, who's become a regular rotation or starter. She was a rotation player last year, now a starter, and she's gotten even better. And you had the two top players coming back, Plunkett and Brown, and they've actually I did not expect them to go undefeated in district play. They have only one loss. That was in a tournament to 6A Bartlesville. So they're definitely a surprise team, and I think Coach Ritchie will get a lot of recognition as, you know, a Coach of the Year candidate in whatever publications give out those awards. He should be one of the highest considered.
Well, I think that this year that I've loved to see the most is the parity of there really hasn't been a lead that, you know, has not given up a little bit of humanism, of showing their weaknesses, meaning when you sell El Reno and their record, and then you saw them against Carl Albert the other day, neutralized a little bit in that aspect. When you have Midwest City, who is the defending state champions in boys, not only lose in the very beginning of the year to a Lawton High and Del City, and then turn around and beat them, it shows that it's really anybody on the west side. Now, of course, we're only talking west side because that's where we're more familiar with about the east side, and it's been really a west side representation of recent years in basketball anyway. So not putting the east down at all, and we'll see them at state. But for the west, I think it's wide open. And I think it goes back to my statement before, is who can get hot. And I remember when MacArthur had to play Carl Albert in the finals a couple of years ago, and they were an outside team shooting. And in fact, they took out the big Tulsa teams that had the big guys underneath. And I was surprised at that, because they said, well, that's your Achilles heel. You don't really have a big man. They were outside shooting, and they were phenomenal. But I always said, if they have an off night, and you mentioned that earlier in our podcast, of team having an off night, if you have an off night, it's going to be bad for you. And unfortunately for MacArthur, their off night was against Carl Albert in the state finals. And I would have liked to seen, if they were hitting those shots, how much of a closer game it could be. But that's really what it entails. I mean, if you can not have an off night, or if you have one and get the win and get past those, who can make that fantastic run. But I'm excited, more so than I have been in recent years, about this run in basketball, because I think it's wide open. I mean, if you say, is it El Reno, Midwest City, Del City, Carl Albert, you know, even MacArthur, you throw them in there, Lawton High, you got 6 or 7 in the conversation that is not going to make state. You know, it's only 8 that go, unless they do a clean sweep and beat those east side teams. Will it be anything that we're going to see?
Yeah, by the way, the El Reno player I was talking about earlier is Trey Davis. So I missed his last name a moment ago. Sorry about that. But yeah, I think because Lawton High moved down to 5A, that's made it real interesting, because you're right. And you had John Marshall got better. I think Lawton MacArthur is actually playing better now than they did at this time last year, even though they had more size last year. So, yes, the 1 through 4 seeds, heck, even Elgin boys had a really good year.
Yes.
So we'll see if they make any noise. And the key is, I really think it's important, if you are able to win the regional championship and then the area championship. Only 2 West Side teams will do that. That means you're going 3-0, 2-0 the regional week, 1-0 area week. And on the boys' side, more than likely, unless there's an upset on the east side, you would avoid in the first round, because they've gotten the seeding down correct now for the state tournament. Last year was a mess. They weren't sure how to do it. This year they have a formula now, and what that means is the 3-0 teams from the West will not play the 3-0 teams from the East in the first round. It would have to be a second round matchup. And again, on the boys' side, I mentioned this on the girls' side, there are 2 undefeated teams in district that are really good, Booker T and Tulsa Memorial. If you go 3-0, you'll probably avoid them in the first round. And the reason why that's important is, again, you never know when you're going to have a bad game. If you have a bad game against one of the other teams from the east side, it's you have a better chance of winning. And then if you can survive that first round, now once you get to the Final Four, you got to be really good. Whether you play Booker T, Memorial, Lawton High, Del City, whoever. But that's why these games early on are so important. So even when you get to a regional championship on Friday of next week, that's not an elimination game. And then you get to area championship on the boys' side. Girls' side would be Tuesday of the following week, which is a change in 5A. Boys would be a Thursday. If you get to an area championship, winning those will help you set up better for state, but doesn't automatically mean anything. Of course, you still have to play a good game that first round, but you want to give yourself every chance you have. So even though they're not elimination games, the regional championship game is not, the area championship game is not, they still take a lot of importance because you want to get the best seeding you can, just because you want every little thing going your way if you can get it. So that's what's going to make these matchups this first 2 weeks so interesting.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it, and you can catch a lot of that on our network. Of course, we're going to be fast and furious. We get a lot of crews out, and looking forward to it. So get ready next week. Well, actually, starting on Saturday, we added Bethany because they're our newest school. They are in districts, so they've not really gotten to the region. And so we're going to do that on Saturday. They moved some stuff with weather-wise. In fact, they moved the swim championship to Monday now. So there's a lot of kind of stuff because of this colder weather and the closings of schools and not having some activities this week. So it's kind of slowed down before, I'll say, the big rush. Well, Jordan, we thank you so much for all of what you do for Mid-Del and giving us this rundown. And, of course, we'll have you back on when it gets close to when we get to all of these games and then when the dust settles about what it looks like on a road to state.
All right, can't wait.
All right, that's Jordan Ray, and he is representing Mid-Del, Midwest City, Del City, and Carl Albert, and you can catch all of those on the network. Mentioned Bethany on Saturday. Mentioned also we'll have the last regular season game on Friday with MacArthur and Eisenhower. First time that we're got to see Eisenhower on the Oklahoma Sports Network. Got to see a lot of the other teams, so that's kind of a city rivalry to kind of put that to bed. And then Monday, don't forget, going to announce that we've got our OSN third annual OSN football banquet for honoring of our Coach of the Year, Player of the Year, the newcomer or rising star of the year, our academic athlete of the year, and then the new category, defensive player of the year. So great opportunity for you to join us live on the network at 7:30. So download the app on Apple and Android devices. Find us on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV. For those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, give us a little like there and a subscription. You subscribe to it for free, and then you follow us, and you can get all activated when we go live. And then all of our social media platforms as well, Facebook, Instagram, and X. So that is this episode of The Point After, live from the podcast studios of Cameron University in the Cetus building at Cameron University's campus. We appreciate them for allowing us to be able to have that time as well. We'll see you next time around on the Oklahoma Sports Network.